In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to import your objects from Max into Unreal and build your level. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to close this out for now and just worry about exporting stuff. So I have a few windows open. Let's pull up Max, and so I'm going to start with the sword that I built earlier in the first tutorial. So we have the sword. You press F4, you can see that's highlighted so you know it's selected. When exporting, you don't have to worry about the size too much. You can scale it in Unreal, but Unreal, if you wanted to know, a character is 96 units high in Unreal, so that you'd have to change your grid spacing to be the equivalent of Unreal's 96 units. So you could figure out how tall everything would go, and you would be able to customize, and you would change your units if you wanted to. But you don't really have to worry about that as long as you just scale it inside of Unreal. So I'm going to scale this down a little bit so it's a little closer to that Unreal size. That should work, probably around there. Alright, so I have this here, and if you go over, make sure it's selected when you click it, and go to File, Export, and we're going to export selected. This way you only do one thing at a time. You can export two different ways. You can do an ASC, or you could do an FBX. Both methods will work. I've already done an ASC here, so I'll do an FBX now to show you what it looks like, and then I'll do an ASC afterwards. So I'm going to call this sword. So I have a sword, it's FBX, and it's going into my tutorial pieces folder, so I'll save that in there. And when doing this, you don't really have to worry about too much on the selection. I put smoothing groups because I use some. Turbo smooth doesn't really matter. But otherwise it should more or less work with default settings. So we'll press OK, and that should have exported it out. So let's minimize that, and we now have the sword FBX sitting in here. And I've already grabbed I used the Photoshop texture to make the texture map, but I converted it back to the Targa, so we have the TGA file. So if I open this in Photoshop, you can see this is our texture map. So let's close that out, and this has already been dropped to the folder, so I know these two are ready to go. And so let's go open Unreal again. And so we're going to be using Unreal Development Kit. I have the 2012 July build, but it might be a different date on yours. And I'm going to be using the UDKey editor and not the game. Alright, and this is what Unreal looks like when you first open it up, or it should depending on the version that you have. We don't need the welcome screen, so I'm going to close that. And then over here is going to be our content browser. We can move this around and look at whatever we have. If you accidentally close that, it's right up here. It's this little black square called Open Content Browser. So we click on that, and sometimes you might have different tabs open, but this is the tab we need, the Content Browser tab. And you have a bunch of default Unreal stuff. But if you go down to here to import, you can import what you've built in 3ds Max. This is saved on the desktop. And you can do multiple files at once. So instead of just doing one at a time pressing open, you can select, let's say, 2 or all of them, and I'll have the two that I'm starting with. So press open. And right here where it says my package, this is going to be where all of your content is contained. So it's like putting all the files you have, all the Max files, all the texture maps, everything you've done into one box or one package. So I'm going to call this the tutorial package, but you can call it anything you want. And you can have multiple packages if you wanted to. Maybe per level you'd have a different package, but generally the package is like your entire game. So when you save it, you don't need to worry about your Max files or textures or anything else. You'll have an Unreal file that will contain all of it for you. And here we have the name, which is using the file name that it was saved as. And default settings should be fine. You don't really have to worry about changing too much down here. But there is one problem we're going to notice if I press OK. Import failed. Name contains invalid characters. You can't have spaces. You have to delete any spaces you have. You can use multiple other symbols like an underscore, but you can't have spaces. Unreal doesn't like that. So I put underscores in there and I press OK now. And that uploaded. So I have one of two up there so far. Then this is going to go also with a tutorial package. We'll leave everything in there. We have the sword, which is the name of the object, and default settings should be fine as well. And by default, it's going to be called a static mesh. So we press OK, and that pulls in both of our files. So if you click here, they were both selected, so they were both yellow, but if you click anywhere off, they'll unselect. So we have the sword and we have our object. If I drag the sword into here, you'll see that it drops it in, but it doesn't have any colors on it, so we have to color our object. So you can delete it if you wanted to, or you can leave it in there. It doesn't really matter. This is a texture. It's not. We need a material to apply to the mesh, so we have to convert this to a material. So if you right-click in this gray area, so anywhere here, just in the gray area, not on an icon, and you go to New Material. We're going to call this. I usually like to put an M first, so I know it's a material. And we're going to call this sword. So no spaces. I used an underscore. Material for the sword, but you can call it anything you want. Put it in the same package. Press OK. Alright, and now we have our, it's called the material editor window. So we can grab the material that we want, the texture, let's say, drag the texture into here, and all we have to do is take this little black square and drag it to the diffuse, because that's the name that the color is called in Max when we, same thing, diffuse. So that's pretty much it. If you want to see, like you can rotate around and it puts the texture on a generic sphere, but if you want to see the sword, all you have to do is click the sword or the object that you want, so it's highlighted in the yellow border, and then click this arrow sign right here, and it puts it in the image right here. This doesn't matter, it's still connected, but this is just a preview. So you can pick different objects to preview your material on, which usually doesn't make sense if you have a texture map specifically for one object, but you can preview if you want to take a look at how you can make changes to it. So that's that. You have to press the check mark to save it though. Don't go to X, just press save first, which is check mark. And so that saves it. And now we can close this out. And so now we have a material and the texture. They look the same because they're just using the same map, but the material is the one that gets applied to the mesh. So if we right click on the mesh and go to, if you double click the mesh, you'll get the static mesh editor. So to apply the material, you look for the LOD, which means level of detail, and expand it out. Sometimes they might be all hidden like this. You just keep clicking and clicking and clicking until it finally gets to this level where you see material. So you click on the material, not the texture. We want the material. And you click the green arrow, and it drops it on your object. And the last thing to do is go to collision, so we don't walk through the object. It has a resistance to the character. So you go to collision, and you can pick anything you want up here. They're just different types of collision. If it's just a box, you might as well go 6-sided. Here are 10 or 18 or 26-sided. But I'm going to do auto because I don't know what shape this is. It's let it automatically generate for me. So auto, and just default settings should be fine. Press apply. And it puts a collision on here. So now I can close this. If you ever want to see the collision again, you just go up here to this one, show collision. It'll show it and turn it off and on. But if you haven't made it yet, it won't show it yet. And that's mostly all you have to do with this. You can spin around and look at it. But when you're done, just close it. It automatically saves. And it should automatically update inside of here. So if you haven't dropped it in your scene yet, you can go back to here and drop another one in if you wanted to. And you have this. If you wanted to make it bigger, the scale button is up here in the top left. There's different types of scaling. That's non-uniform, and that's more, I guess, uniform. There's rotate and move. So I'm going to do scale at the moment, and if I wanted to make the sword really big, I could make it really big. So if you scale it in Max, it doesn't necessarily matter, because what you export or put into Unreal, you can rechange later. So in the last button, let's close this out, and let's press play. and it drops you in the scene, and you can walk up to it, and you can't walk through it because it has a collision on there, so you can navigate throughout your level now. And so more or less, that's how you bring in the first object, which is pretty simple when it only has one texture map on it. Alright, let's close out that, and let's jump back to, let's minimize that. Let's do the signpost now. So over here I have my signpost. I'm going to drag this into Unreal, or into Max, press Open File. And something I didn't mention on the sewer, but it's really important. Let's press Continue here. You have to center it to the grid. So you see the grid right here? If you don't center your object to the grid, like this one's centered, but if I don't center this one, when Unreal gets it, let's jump back to Unreal. You see this coordinate system? If I go to like move or something, how it's sitting perfectly right there in the middle of your object, that's corresponding to the grid. So if this is sitting here, your coordinates are going to be right here. So if you want to move this object, you're going to have to click right here, because this, let's say go to move, this coordinate will be sitting right here because it's going to put the coordinates on the middle of your grid. So it's best just to center your object so this coordinate controller will appear there. So I'm going to delete out that, don't need it. If you can either slide it if you want, or if you go down to your positions, you can right click on the scroll wheel or the spinner, and it'll reset it for you. So everything's zeroed out. It doesn't have to be zeroed, but this way you can see that it's perfectly centered on top of the grid. I guess you could always just move it a little further forward if you wanted to. It doesn't specifically matter, but again, wherever the center point of this grid is where this cursor is going to appear on your object. Alright, so we have our object, and this time we'll do an ASC export. So it's already selected. If I go to Export Selected, I'm going to switch this out to ASE, and we're going to call this signpost. Alright, and press Save. And we'll have a different dialog box this time, different settings. The important ones are mesh normals and mapping coordinates, otherwise you may not get your textures in the right place. But more or less, if it looks like this, it should be fine. More or less, it should be default. These might not be automatically checked, but make sure those are checked. Otherwise, you should be okay. And press OK on that. And that exports. Let's minimize that. Pull up our folders again. So we've got the signpost ASCs right here. And we have the signpost diffuse and normal because I already dragged them in there. So we only had these two this time. I have a few more for the last project, or last object. I'll explain that next. So I jump back to UDK, go back to Content Browser, and go to Import. And I'm going to grab the signpost with the two other maps and press Open. And again, everything's in the tutorial package. The static mesh or the object is signpost. Press OK. This one's a diffuse, which is a color, so default's OK. And the next one is normal. If you wanted to, you can change blending mode. Oops, not blending mode. TC default to TC normal map because it corresponds to it being a normal. It's just the compression setting, so Unreal knows how to store it and save it and stuff. But it's not super important to change that. But again, normal matches with normal. Alright, and press OK. And so that should import our three objects, or object with the two maps. Alright, so they popped in. So again, we have to create a material for these. So we'll right click in the empty area, go to new material, and we're going to call this anything you want, material signpost, and press OK. And if you want to make the object appear, you click on this first, and then click the arrow. You don't see it because there's no material added to it, but now the signpost is sitting there. We'll go to let's say this one, I'll drag that in there, and I'll take this one and I'll drag this one in there. And if you want to rearrange these, by default you're going to keep moving your screen around, but if you hold the control button on the keyboard and click, you can start moving it. This was the one selected already, so if I click off there, click this one, hold control, I can move this around. Now if I don't hold control, I'll move the screen around. I can also zoom in and out the scroll wheel. So I'm going to move this one up a little higher just so it aligns a little better, so it makes things more organized, but it doesn't really matter where these are. So the black one, which is our full color RGB, we'll drag to the diffuse, and now you can see that it puts the color on our object. It doesn't have the normal maps though, so we need to take this normal map and plug that into the normal section, and boom, that pops the normals on our object. So now we have the color on the diffuse, the normals on the normal, and we just press check mark for save, and that saves our material. So now we double click on the static mesh, scroll down till you see material, click the almost there. Hopefully it didn't crash. Well, click the material and then you click the green button to apply it. But it looks like Unreal might have, nope, almost crashed. Good thing it didn't. Alright, so to click the material, click on the green arrow, and it drops the material on there. So now we can see what we're looking at. And again, go to collision, and I'm just going to do auto because it's a complex shape. Press apply, and it builds the mesh around there. So when the character walks up to it, it's this red box, green box, and blue that the character is bouncing against, not your actual object and polygons, but just this primitive basic shape. And you can change the numbers if you want to change the how the collision looks. Press apply. Oops, and it's already applied by default. And you close that, and you can drag your static mesh in there, and that drops it in there. So let's close this, and it looks a little small, so I'll scale it a little bigger. And then press play. And run over to the object, and you can see you can't walk through it because it has the collision applied, and it has the same look that it had in Max, and it's pretty much finished. So you can keep rearranging your scene. At this point, let's escape out of there. You can go to move and start moving things around, and again the coordinates appeared in the middle of the object because we centered it to the grid. So if I wanted to move this over here, I could move it. You can make it floaty if you wanted to. Put that there. I could put the sword over here, and you can rearrange anything you want. Make multiple. You can keep dragging more objects in there. So that more or less is how you're going to start building your world. And let's import one more thing in case you guys have complex objects. So the last one, minimize this and that. I did a pillar. So I already have the pillar static mesh, which is an ASE in here, and the 4 different files. The 4 files are, let's open these in Photoshop. Open with Photoshop. So we didn't really cover all of this part in class, so this is kind of extra, is that there's 4 different maps. The first map is the diffuse map, which shows all the color. So whatever you see here is going to be your color. Let's close that. This one is a specular map, so this part will be shiny. The rest of the rocks and stuff won't be shiny, but this guy will be shiny, kind of like a bronze kind of metal feel. This is the normal map. And this is our alpha channel or opacity map, so the leaf will appear without the actual border of the square image on there. So we'll close out that. Alright, so that's the 4 different maps we have here. Also of note, for saving, let's go to File, File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Tutorial Demo. So we press Save, and by default it's going to save it in this location, and I'm going to press OK on that. Let's save. And so that saves, but we also need to save the content, because all you did is save the level, which is where everything goes, but not what everything is. So again, content browser, see where it says new package? That's the tutorial package we created. So everything, all of this content is being saved in this package, but the asterisk means it's not saved yet. So we need to right-click the tutorial and go to Save. And by default, it'll put it in the same section and call it Tutorial UPK. And we'll press Save. Alright, and so that's saved it. And if you click back here, it's all of our tutorials now saved. Now if I were to close this, and this is kind of important, if you want to find this again, and you look on your computer, it's going to be on the C drive, UDK, and this is the date that the program was installed. It could be different. We're going to the game, and we're looking for content, because the content is everything we're adding to it. And the first section you'll see is the UPK. This is all the content that was put together. You'll only have one UPK file, and that's all you need. You could have more, but everything you've put in Unreal should be contained in one UPK. And the maps, the tutorial demo is a UDK. So the first was a UPK, and this is a UDK. So maps are UDK. If you happen to not have these in here, let's say you're taking it home on the USB drive, so I'll drag this out of there. So it's not in here. When Unreal loads, and what you should do is drag all your files in this location on the school's computer before you turn Unreal on. This makes it a lot easier and a lot less complicated. If you don't do this, it could save your file and be really annoying. So if the file is not in here when you first load Unreal, let's go to Unreal Editor. And the map already is, but assuming the map wasn't either, but we'll just select it. So I'll close out that and that, so we have a blank scene. We'll go to Open, and the map is already here because it was saved in that location, and Unreal will default to this location. If you clicked on USB or somewhere else, it'll grab that, you'll find it, and you'll press Open, and it'll say you're missing your objects. So you press OK, and nothing's in your scene, because the UDK, the file save as, is only saving where it goes, not your actual objects. You need the package to save that. So if you go to the content browser, you can also note it's not sitting in here. The tutorial package is not here. It can't find it, so you can't see your objects until it appears in here. So it's always best to go to the Unreal folder, drop everything in, and then open the program. Otherwise, it won't find it, in which case you can't edit with it. However, if you do decide to add it in there later, let's see if I can Control-Z that. Yep. All right, so now it's in here. Or if you don't have it in there, you can always go to, oops, pop that back in there. Go to Open, and see it still doesn't even appear yet. You have to go to Open, and then you can pick where it is, and then you can press Open. So again, it's a lot easier if you just drop it in the folder to begin with and just leave it in the folder. The only danger is if you turn off the computer, the school's computer, it'll erase all your C drive, so you'll lose all your content. So make sure you save this all the time, and when you're done for the day, put it on the USB and then close Unreal, or close and then put it on USB, and then put it on the computer before you load it back up. Either way, the tutorial's there. So but we still don't have the scene yet, so let's just go Open again. We'll open that, and it should refresh it, and everything pops back in. So we click back here, and now we have all of our content again. So if I close that, it's reappeared. So that's how you open and save. There's, again, two savings, the UDK and the UPK, and you'll need at least the UPK if you don't want to do all the materials again. The UDK saves for positioning. All right. So again, let's do one last import in case you have some more complicated stuff. So we'll go Content Browser, Import, and we're importing on top of the tutorial package. So let's go to Desktop Pieces. So we're going to grab all the pillar pieces and the pillar static mesh. So I'll press open, and this one's the diffuse, so that's okay to open. This one's the opacity, which should be okay to open, or by default settings. This is normal, so I'm going to set this to normal. And this is a specular map, so I'm going to put that back to default. And that's, yeah, just default. Press OK on that. And the pillar, just the pillar itself. So that pulls in our 4 new files. So, actually 5. Here's the static mesh. Alright, so again, right click in any of the gray areas and go to New Material. And we're going to call this, put the M for material, and call this pillar. And again, no spaces. Now let's grab all of our pieces. We have our diffuse, which goes up there. We have the opacity, I'll drop right there. The normal, I'll put there. And the spec, I'll put right there. So again, I can rearrange these if I want to. Hold the control key, put spec there, move this up here. You don't have to rearrange these, it just makes them a little more organized. Diffuse connects, or colored to diffuse. The spec will go to specular, and that makes things shiny. And the normal goes to normal. And the last one, let's grab our static mesh and apply that so we can see what's happening. Alright, if you look closely, oops, you'll see that there's black squares surrounding the leaf. So that's what's going to be our opacity. It's going to get rid of the black around and just show only the leaf. So to do that, we're going to drag this onto opacity mask. So we're going to mask it. But nothing's going to change at first. So the first thing we need to do is change the, under material, the blend opaque to masked. And then it'll show that. Also of note, because by default a polygon is only single-sided, if you flip to the other side, they're going to disappear because it's only a one-sided object. So you only see polygons from one direction. You can, however, click two-sided down here, and it'll double-side your polygons. So now you can see it from the top and the bottom. Alright, so that's that. And you can see this guy is shiny because he has the specular map on there. If you put it in the wrong one, right-click, break link, and you'll see that it loses his shininess. So now he's not shiny anymore. But if I want to put this back on here, just drag it back to spec. And now you can see, if I rotate around, the shine shines around him. You can also readjust the light, but again, this is just a preview, it doesn't matter. If you hold L and left click, you can move the light around wherever you want it to go. So it's helpful to see how things look, but it's not necessary to rearrange the lighting. So we have this here. Alright, and again, check mark will save. Slide this over and close it. Double click on static mesh. Find the material, which should start with an M, material. Apply that. We now have our object, nicely colored. Collision, auto collision, apply, close, close. Drag our object on the scene. Close, make it a little bigger, looks a little small. And then press, let's rotate it. And then press play. And so here's our object. So the leaves are double-sided now because we clicked double-sided. And everything's imported. You can't walk through it because it has the collision on there. And again, you can keep building your scene. So this one has a few more maps than we usually cover in class. It has the normal, the diffuse, it has the opacity for the leaf, and it has specular for the guy so he can be shiny. And that more or less covers how to import into Unreal. Again, when you're ready to save, make sure you go to File, Save Current Level if you've already saved it once. That saves the level, but you also need to go to the content browser, and again, the asterisk means it hasn't been saved. So right-click and save, and it'll save all the new content inside of tutorial package. and that saves the package, and you're all done. Go back to where you have all the content, tutorial, and inside the maps is the demo. So UDK and UPK, and that's the two files we'll need for class, is the UDK and UPK, and all the max and texture files. And that more or less should cover how to bring it into Unreal. It gets a little more complicated after that, but that's all we need to worry about right now.